In 1612, Polish soldiers occupied Moscow for the first time in 400 years. In 1683, Polish cavalry crushed the Ottomans at the Battle of Vienna. Ever since the Union of Lublin bound Poland and Lithuania together into a dynastic union, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had been one of, if not the most powerful state in Eastern Europe. Yet just a century after, in 1795, the country would vanish from the map completely. Divided between Prussia, Russia, and the Austrian Empire, the name of Poland was relegated to the ranks of empires and kingdoms from ages past. For future generations, the days when the Polish eagle flew over Warsaw was a bygone era. Which begs the question, how did a former great power disappear from the face of Europe for over a century, as if it had never existed at all? And how have historians, both Polish and foreign, written about the partitions in the ensuing centuries? Like always, a trip down history lane has the answer. By 1772, the Commonwealth was a shadow of its former self. Once the vast nation capable of forging its own destiny, it had been reduced to a vassal state of the Russian Empire, subject to the whims of great power diplomacy. But it wasn't always like this. In the 17th century, the Commonwealth lay at the height of its power. With almost 1 million square kilometers and 12 million people beneath its banners, it was a force to be reckoned with. But neither was it your regular early modern nation state. As we'll see, Poland's interesting political system was one of its peculiar traits that would catalyse its downfall. To begin with, let's have a look at the Commonwealth's social structure. Over the centuries, the Kingdom of Poland and later Poland-Lithuania developed a unique social hierarchy. At the top stood the monarchy, at first hereditary and then elected. Below were the magnates, rich businessmen from the nobility, but the most important were the Szlachta, widely considered the backbone of society. Unlike Western European nobility, the Szlachta combined the function of noble, warrior and official, producing a social class not too dissimilar to the samurai of Japan. Based on generations of tradition, the Szlachta feared absolutism, and forced the Commonwealth's monarchy to swear on various laws, just like English kings swore to uphold the Magna Carta. As kings held less and less power, the ability to initiate any sort of reform was severely hamstrung, to the point that taxation took longer than a real-life law video. The rise of absolutist monarchies in Europe meant that the Commonwealth's neighbours were able to introduce reforms far faster than they could, and nowhere was this as significant as electing a king. According to historian Adam Zamoyski, whilst many European monarchies centralised their authority, kings in Poland-Lithuania could do little to bolster their own power without angering the Szlachta. Unlike in France where monarch and state were indivisible, there existed a clear distinction between the two in Poland. For Polish kings, the only real way to strengthen their authority was through the glory of war, sometimes with disastrous consequences. After a series of wars against Sweden, it was obvious that the Commonwealth needed a strong central authority. Jan Kazimierz, the son of Swedish King Sigismund Vasa, attempted to push through reforms that included a mandatory annual tax, two-thirds majority voting, and the election of his successor before his death. With the uprising of Khmelnytsky's Cossacks in Ukraine in 1654, the Commonwealth began to dither internally. The reforms of Jan Kazimierz fell flat after a Sejm session in 1658 was simply vetoed, and the country was stuck in a perpetual gridlock between the reactionary Szlachta and reformist kings. This gave rise to what is known simply as the Anarchy, a period of time when the Commonwealth lacked any real leadership. After Sweden's defeat in the Great Northern War of 1710, Russia had proven itself a great power. The interests of all of Poland's neighbours could no longer be ignored, and those interests included committing election interference. In 1715, Peter the Great of Russia mediated a dispute within the Commonwealth between Augustus II and the Szlachta over, once again, reforms. Before a civil war could spark, Peter stationed Russian soldiers in Poland to stabilise the situation, a tale as old as time it seems. In 1717, the Silent Sejm was held under the close watch of Russian troops as the Polish political nation ratified the Treaty of Warsaw. In the treaty, the Commonwealth's armies were severely restricted, and by 1718, Poland-Lithuania was a protectorate of Russia in all but name. As the decades wore on, kings came and went. The Szlachta slowly realised that the Commonwealth needed reform were it to survive the century. But the magnates who had profited during the anarchy by controlling what amounted to their own mini-nations opposed any changes. As such, gridlock remained the status quo. Neither was this helped by the use of the liberum veto, where any member of the Sejm could delay or end a session of legislature at their whim. The Szlachta turned to local administration, which proved more efficient than the central government. And soon the period of anarchy was even seen as ideal in the anti-absolutist minds of the Szlachta, preventing anyone from really doing much to change the status quo. Except as always, history proved a consummate trickster. In a twist of irony, the Commonwealth introduced sweeping reforms in the last years of its life. At the head of these reforms lay the Familia, a powerful faction led by the noble Czartoryski family. With the accession of Catherine the Great's ex-lover Poniatowski to the throne in 1764, a new era seemed to be dawning. The Familia had raised Adam Kazimierz, a descendant of the Commonwealth's founding dynasty, to spearhead the new reforms. With wide support, a confederated Sejm was proclaimed, which allowed laws to be passed through majority voting instead of unanimity. Reforms for everything from taxes to the military were passed, which began to alarm both Prussia and Russia, who, surprise surprise, didn't like having a strong Poland as a neighbour. Soon, both sides aimed to destabilise the Commonwealth's internal politics by pushing for full religious freedom, which the Familia were planning to do anyway, except now they didn't want to do it under the watch of Russian soldiers. Just like when you're told to wash the dishes by your dad when you were going to do them anyway. Striking parallels aside, those once in favour of the reforms before Russia and Prussia interfered now sat firmly in opposition, leaving the king in a tricky position. Choosing to support the wrong person would risk foreign invasion. Whilst Catherine forced the Sejm to reaffirm the Liberum veto, the Confederation of Bar was set up in 1768 in Ukraine to oppose them, just as the Ottomans and Russia went to war. In 1770, the Confederation declared war on the king and tried to kidnap him, which was somehow planned worse than Franz Ferdinand's assassination. The Russians came in and wiped the floor with them, as did the Prussians, who coveted lands in Pomerania in order to connect Prussia with Brandenburg. In the flavour of 18th century European politics, Russia opted to prevent the Commonwealth from becoming an ally of its enemies. Through a secret pact with Russia, Prussia and the Austrian Empire, chunks of Poland were simply annexed in 1772 in what was the First Partition, and yes, there were more to come. With no choice, the Sejm recognised the partition, despite fervent opposition from the Familia. Now you might think this was the end for Poland. In hindsight, it may seem that way, but it was then that the Commonwealth underwent sweeping reforms during the last 20 years of its existence. A new permanent council finally brought a level of central government to Poland, and reforms to the army, treasury and bureaucratic organs brought the Commonwealth into line with other European states. Neither were the reforms just limited to government. New universities were opened, literature flourished, and it seems that a new cultural golden age had finally washed over the desperate Commonwealth. The economy boomed as proto-capitalist ventures were set up by the Szlachta. By the 1790s, the Commonwealth was almost unrecognisable. The works of Enlightenment-era writers like Rousseau on the rights of nations birthed a new generation of young idealists who wished to see the Commonwealth free from foreign chains. King Poniatowski, later Stanislav II Augustus, and his acceptance of the partitions weren't popular to say the least. Hugo Kołłątaj, a former priest, was instrumental in preparing a new constitution which would light the fires of what he dubbed the Gentle Revolution. In an era when absolutism had begun to wane, the demands for a strong hereditary monarchy was an oddity in Poland, but it proved popular. King Stanislav invited Kołłątaj and other key nobles to form the constitution. As always, the political landscape of 18th century Europe was ever-changing, presenting Poland with a new ally in the form of Prussia. However, with Russia's victory against the Ottomans in 1792, Russian eyes soon turned back to the Commonwealth. Catherine the Great sent soldiers into Poland to prevent the constitution from passing. After Prussia declined Poland's request to help, the Commonwealth was left to fight Russia itself, which went as well as you would expect. Prussia then demanded land in the west as compensation for doing fuck all, and in 1792 the Second Partition turned the Commonwealth into a weird ostrich-like creature on the map of Europe. In desperation, statesmen Tadeusz Kościuszko and others declared an emergency council and started a revolution against Russia. The proclamation of 1794 promised peasants land ownership if they fought for the revolutionaries, but reached very few people thanks to the efforts of scared nobles. With Prussian aid, Russia captured Warsaw, and by 1795 the Commonwealth had been utterly defeated. The final partition was signed in October of that year, formally ending the existence of Poland-Lithuania. For over a century after, the ideals of the Commonwealth would live on, manifested in the uprisings of 1830 and 1863. Since then, the partitions have always cast a shadow over Polish culture. The century of occupation by foreign powers changed the substance of the Polish psyche forever. In time, the multi-ethnic values of the Commonwealth became a relic of a bygone age, especially during an era when ethnic nationalism became the basis of statehood in Eastern Europe. The exact factors leading to the partitions were not fully agreed upon in Polish historiography. Two schools of thought regarding the partitions arose in the 1960s and 70s, when the People's Republic of Poland existed as a Soviet satellite. The first was the Krakow school of thought, which pinned the blame on Poland and its internal politics. The gridlock had prevented reforms that would have allowed the Commonwealth to catch up with their neighbours. In opposition stood the Warsaw School, which blamed external factors, those being the interference of Prussia, Austria and Russia. The Krakow School drew criticism for ignoring the simple fact of Poland's renewal during the last 20 years of its life. Even at the mercy of its neighbours, the Commonwealth had made unprecedented strides in moving away from the factors that the Krakow School blamed in the first place. In turn, the Warsaw School was faulted for ignoring the domestic situation that did exist within Poland. For all its constitutional freedom, the average Polish peasant lived in a similar state to a Russian serf, contributing to social tension. A third view was proposed by Julian Marchlewski. The man that had been chosen to lead a Soviet puppet state back in 1920 had the Red Army won the Polish-Soviet War. In classic Marxist rhetoric, the partition happened as a result of class struggle. But outside of this, little attention was really given to the partitions during the Cold War era, aside from two historians who re-evaluated both contemporaneous schools of thought. First was Bogusław Leśnodorski, who highlighted parallels between the Krakow School's blame of Poland with similar writings of Russian and German historians. His writings put forward 6 different reasons for the partitions, from Poland's geography to its social structure and the technological disparity between East and West. This view embraced nuanced aspects of the Krakow and Warsaw schools, but where it fell flat was the unclear importance given to either internal or external factors of the partitions. Leśnodorski wrote that the anarchy, whilst weakening the state, wasn't the real cause of Poland's demise, which actually lay in Polish attempts to secure complete independence through force of arms. What this meant was that Janusz Kościuszko's uprising in 1794 and similar acts gave an excuse for outside powers to simply wipe Poland from the map like a table stain. The other historian, Marian Sarejski, analysed the writings of historians over the 19th century and found that most historians both outside and within Poland followed a consensus on the partitions. What he also found was that the partitions were heavily politicised in Poland, preventing an objective view from being taken, whilst those outside didn't have to deal with this. Similarly, most historians that blamed Poland simply omitted the rapid reform the state underwent after 1772. Yet even in the 1970s, the view on the causes of the partitions hadn't changed, that being Poland was simply the unlucky underdog, fighting against two much larger states. Which leaves the question of what, if anything, has changed concerning the view of the partitions in the modern day. In the post-Soviet era, Polish identity underwent a period of introspection. People wondered what values the Polish nation were to be rooted in, and what the new narrative of Polish statehood was going to be. Were their values rooted in the personal liberties of the multi-ethnic Commonwealth, or a state just for Poles? The partitions as a discrete event was either sidelined or ignored, overshadowed by the legacy of communist rule and the Second World War, and that dilemma remains the case to this day. So, with all this, why was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth partitioned? The period of anarchy in the early 1700s was the catalyst, but not a direct cause. By allowing Russian influence to seep in, Poland-Lithuania was denied the ability to remain neutral in great power politics. And through failing to reform, the Commonwealth fell behind the powerful centralised states that bordered it. But that isn't to say the first partition was the death blow many believed it was. Before 1792, the Commonwealth experienced a new era of regeneration, yet an independent Poland that could side against any one of its neighbours was a security threat no power was willing to accommodate. In essence, the Commonwealth was dismembered not because it was weak, but because of its strength, which no country could ignore. Today, Poland-Lithuania is remembered fondly, both as an early attempt at constitutional liberalism, and as one of the great what-ifs of history. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. Like always, I'm Iravic, and I'll see you in the next one.